Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth session in American English Live Teacher Development Series 9. We're thrilled to be back with you for another exciting AE Live session. My name is Lauren, and I'll be with you today along with my colleague behind the scenes, Heather, who will be serving as moderator to help answer your questions and respond to your comments during the session. Today, our host, Kate, will be talking with our presenter, Kim Chilmonick, about interactive, ready-to-use activities designed to motivate learners enrolled in lecture-styled classes. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's always great to see everybody here, and it's great to see you here today as usual. So let's begin today with these wonderful comments from participants. We have Edith D, who says, I will definitely apply choice in my class starting today. Thank you. That was a great comment about our student choice and voice webinar last time. Thanks, Edith. Heidi says, thank you, Lindsay. This was an excellent modeling of what true learner-centered practices look like. Thank you so much for that comment. And Martha V says, thanks a lot. The strategies covered are so practical to implement. So thanks so much, everybody. We love to see our teacher participants actively engaged, and we encourage you to continue to do so. Please feel free to continue to participate with us and share your thoughts and insights about AE Live sessions by emailing them to American English Webinars at fhi360.org or by sharing them on social media. We may feature one of your comments or photos during the next webinar. Today is our fifth session in American English Live Teacher Development Series 9. During this second half of the series, we are exploring sessions related to the themes of cultivating meaningful discussion using critical thinking skills and corrective feedback in the classroom. We hope you'll be able to use the practical ideas we share. Which sessions or themes are you most excited about? Let us know in the chat box. So here's what to expect today. Each session is about 60 minutes long and is often related to an online professional English network massive open online course. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and experiences. So please do share your thoughts using the comments feature or chat box. When our session comes to a close in about an hour, you'll have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of this session, we'll share a link in the comments and at the top of this post. Click on that link and complete a short quiz about today's session. You must answer 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correctly. And once you've successfully done so, you should expect to receive your badge via email within about a week. We're thrilled to share about our current self-paced massive open online course, English for Media Literacy. The course opened on October 5th and will remain open until March 29th. We hope you'll join us for this free MOOC focused on the different types of mass media. To learn more and enroll, visit the link both on the screen and being shared by the moderators in the chat or comments. And now for today's session, Superpowering Your Lecture, activities to engage learners and gather feedback. This webinar is designed for teachers of all levels who want to incorporate active learning approaches and techniques in their classes. In this webinar, we'll explore several interactive, ready-to-use activities designed to motivate learners enrolled in lecture-style classes, and we'll discuss how these approaches can enable instructors to gather crucial information about their students' progress and understanding of the material. And now we're pleased to introduce our presenter, Kim Chilmonick. Kim is a Senior Program Officer with the U.S. Department of State's Office of English Language Programs, where she supports global outreach and education initiatives. She has 15 years of experience as a TESOL teacher and teacher trainer, and previously served as an English language fellow for the Professional Communication Skills for Leaders Project in Cambodia, and as a virtual English language specialist working with Access Teachers in Nicaragua. Kim holds a TEFL certificate from Peace Corps Mongolia and a Master's of Arts in TESOL from the University of Alabama. Welcome, Kim. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone to this American English Live webinar. My name is Kim, and I'm so excited you could all join me today for this professional development session. I am very passionate about the topic of interactive lecturing because I think this approach can be useful to any teacher of any level or subject area. Interactive lecturing can superpower your teaching skills, and I hope this approach and the activities I introduced today will be helpful for you teachers out there that are either conducting face-to-face classes or have transitioned to teaching online due to the pandemic and are looking for activities to reach your students virtually. I also hope these activities will help you elicit feedback from your students so you can superpower their learning. So how about we start with goals for this session? So I wanted to start the session by reviewing the principles of interactive lecturing and then move to learning about 3 activities designed to motivate and increase student engagement. These activities can also be used by teachers to gather valuable feedback from students about their progress and understanding of class material. I've added a bright yellow car to our roadmap to show us where we are, and you will continue to see our little car move as we continue through the session. But before we drive to our next destination, I'd like to do a quick review and brainstorm about both communicative teaching and lecturing. So tell us in the chat, what are some adjectives that describe a communicative ELT classroom?
Yeah, what do you think, everybody? What adjectives would you use to describe an ELT, a communicative ELT classroom? What do you think, everyone? Let's see. I see engaging, interactive, great. What other ideas do you have for how you would describe a communicative ELT class? What do you think? Let's see, Zoe says interactive. Ugur says real life or similar to real life. That's great. Fun from Alero. Engaging from Jeanette. Similar to real life also from Erica. Challenging from Jean. Motivating from Kang. Dynamic. Fun and happy from Richard. Energetic from Miriam, and lots of other great adjectives. Thanks everybody for sharing.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So now let's talk about lecturing. So again, what are some adjectives that describe a lecture-based class?
All right, so let's switch from the communicative ELT classroom and go to a lecture-based class. How would you describe a lecture-based class? Let's see, what ideas do you have? What would you say, or how would you describe a lecture-based class? Active listening from Alero, great. Monotonous from Sharmitha, I think that's probably a word that a lot of us would think of. Boring from Kang. Teacher-centered from Irina. Organized from JM. And quiet, except for the teacher. So very good. Thanks for sharing, everybody.
Yeah, I can definitely see there are some differences between the two just based on your adjectives. For example, many people said communicative classes are engaging, interactive, fun, and learner-centered. But lecture-based classes I saw were not as engaging, monotonous, maybe teacher-centered. So from your adjectives, it kind of seems like these two approaches are opposites. But instead of framing these approaches as opposites, today we want to learn how to bridge the gap between active learning and lecturing. So we will develop our teaching superpowers today by exploring interactive lecturing. So you might want to know, what is interactive lecturing exactly? So it is an approach that combines the benefits from both active learning principles and lecturing to achieve your teaching goals. So with this approach, we're kind of taking the best from both worlds. So if we look at this Venn diagram, we can see what elements we are taking from both approaches. On the left, you see active learning. Research tells us that students learn more when they're active participants in the learning process. For teachers, active learning is all about creating opportunities for students to engage in the learning process And that is what we're bringing to interactive lecturing. Now on the right, you see lecture. A well-organized and delivered lecture can quickly transmit a large amount of information to students. So we want to take that element and bring it to interactive lecturing. And right in the middle, where they're overlapping, you see interactive lecturing, combining the best from both. So I bet you're curious, what does interactive lecturing actually look like in the classroom? So the best explanation I found was in Interactive Lecturing, a handbook for college faculty. The authors, Barkley and Major, explain that during an interactive lecture, the class session is structured into segments of presentation, combined with and punctuated or interrupted by segments of student activity. So I thought this picture on the left was a perfect symbol because we can visualize each color of the circle representing either a segment of presentation or a segment of student activity. But let's look at an example session plan and see what an interactive lecture actually looks like in practice. So when we see a session plan this way, it's pretty clear to see how each part is segmented. There are no strict time limits or restrictions, but typically the lecture or presentation segments are about 15 to 20 minutes. The student activity or engagement technique also does not have any time restrictions. So these activities can be anywhere from 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, or longer if you need it. All right, now that we've defined interactive lecturing, and we have a pretty good idea of what it looks like in the classroom, let's learn some activities we can use during the student activities part of the session. So as you can see, our yellow car is moving right along, and we're arriving at our first activity idea. The first activity I want to introduce is called the Punctuated Lecture, and it comes from the K. Patricia Cross Academy website. They have an amazing library of resources and videos for teachers interested in interactive lecture activities. I put a link to this website in the name and in the references so you can find it after the webinar. I also wanted to note that even though the word punctuated looks very similar to punctuation, it actually has nothing to do with punctuation in this context. So for this session, it means to interrupt or to occur repeatedly. So a punctuated lecture follows the session plan we just reviewed in that it's a short 15-minute lecture segment followed by an engagement technique that is a very short reflective prompt or question. The prompt has students reflect on their level of engagement and or kind of what they're doing at the moment the lecture paused. And as teachers, we know it's always better to show rather than tell. So I hope you're all ready for a pop quiz. So please stop everything you're doing and reflect on your experience during this webinar so far. Please respond to this prompt in the chat. What were you doing before the webinar paused right now? So you can type A, B, C, or D in the chat. And please be honest, there are no wrong answers, and I promise no one will get in trouble.
Okay, so what do you think, everybody? We hope you'll be nice and honest for us. What were you doing before we asked this question and paused? Were you listening to the speaker, taking notes, looking at social media or another website, or other off-task activity? What were you doing? I see some A's, listening to the speaker, a couple of D's, that's okay. We'll bring you back. Listening to the speaker, A and B. Of course, these wonderful webinar participants who are the best webinar participants in the world are saying a lot of A and B, listening to the speaker or taking notes. So that's wonderful, and we're so happy to have you all here. And even if you were doing C or D, that's okay. We're happy to have you here as well. As Kim said, there are no wrong answers.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm really glad to see there are lots of A's and B's, but keep in mind that even the C's and D's can give us really valuable information that can inform our teaching plan. So I know you all just answered a question, but I'm going to ask you another one right now. So what did you feel or what did you think when you were taking this surprise quiz? Is there anything you noticed or became aware of? Do you think your level of engagement in the webinar has changed? I'd love to hear from you in the chat.
Yeah, so how do you feel about this question and about taking this quiz? Did it make you feel a certain way, or did you maybe have a reaction to it? Let's see, Jose Alfredo says he felt nervous. Saeed said he felt more engaged. Rosa said she was listening to the speaker, and I saw a couple of people who said that they were drinking coffee, which is always a great plan if you're, in my opinion. Sharmisa says she felt more involved. And Zoe says she was more aware about her attention, about what her attention level was at that time. And Ricardo says it was quite a surprise. So great responses, everybody. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, when you do this activity with your students, this prompt can definitely make your students more aware of their off-task behavior, and they can kind of self-correct to get back on task. And all this is happening without the prompting of you or the direct instruction of you, so we can save our voices for our lecture. So thanks again for your thoughtful responses. So let's move on and explore some other benefits this engagement technique has to offer. So I think the greatest value that the punctuated lecture prompt offers is the opportunity for students to develop and improve their metacognitive skills, meaning that students develop an awareness of their thinking and learning. And again, research tells us that the metacognitive skills and practices can actually increase our students' ability to transfer and adapt their learning to new contexts and new tasks. So again, this technique can also allow teachers to receive crucial feedback on students' engagement with the class material. So if many students are answering with off-task responses, you can take steps immediately to try to resolve the issue. Or if it's kind of a continuous or ongoing issue, you can develop and implement a plan to address the problem. Another benefit is that you can use this technique to re-engage students that have gone off task. As I mentioned earlier, this question or prompt can make students notice and become aware of their off-task behavior, and they can self-correct to get back on task. And again, if you use this technique frequently throughout the semester or academic year, you can also strengthen your students' active listening skills, because they're developing the ability to kind of self-monitor their own listening and engagement in class. Additionally, this type of prompt can challenge students to be self-aware of their engagement and involvement in their learning. Again, developing those self-monitoring and metacognitive skills. So now that we have some pretty good reasons why we should try this technique, let's talk about how to develop a thoughtful and effective prompt or question. So when planning a punctuated lecture prompt or question, first, you'll want to identify what challenge or concern you want to address. So for example, do your students seem distracted by social media during class? Now, I know everyone has different challenges in your context, so I'd love to hear from you. What are some challenges or concerns in your classroom that you would like to address?
Yeah, what do you think, everyone? Kim shared the example of maybe your students are distracted by social media during class. What are some other challenges or concerns that you might want to address? Or maybe that's one of your challenges and you can share that as well. While we're waiting for your responses, Kim, I have a quick question for you from J.M. Padilla.
Wow, great.
Yeah, he's asking, how many minutes can you lecture before you would stop and do this punctuated piece here?
That's a great question. So there isn't really a strict time limit, but I think what I kept reading over and over when I was researching this is about 15 to 20 minutes of lecture is the most effective. I think any longer than that, and you risk kind of losing the engagement of the students. And so that's kind of why they have that structure of presentation, activity, presentation, activity.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of great ideas coming in about challenges. So Aria and Vanessa say students using cell phones is a challenge. Cesar says managing shyness in the virtual environment. Omarowski says making the topic relevant for students. And Luar says dealing with topics that students don't seem interested in. So maybe your curriculum is sort of requiring you to address a certain topic, but your students don't really care about that topic. And that's the same idea from Sharmitsa. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I wanted to mention, when you're choosing a challenge you want to address, keep in mind that the prompt we are designing is meant to bring students' attention to the issue. So we'll see on the next slide, if you choose an issue like low attendance, this kind of prompt will not be able to draw students' awareness or attention to it because they're not there, right? So we want to choose a concern that students will be able to self-monitor and adjust. So like, for example, that social media usage in class, or them being on their cell phone. So let's look at an example challenge and create a responsive question or prompt together. All right, here's our challenge. So you are the teacher and you have observed that your students often do not take notes during class. You believe your students are not taking adequate or maybe disorganized notes, and this is preventing them from deeply learning the material. So now we want to clarify our teaching goal. So what feedback do we want to receive, and what do we want to accomplish with our prompt? For example, I want to understand more about my students' note-taking behaviors and draw my students' attention to their note-taking habits. Clarifying the purpose and the intention of the activity helps focus and strengthen your prompt design to ensure you receive useful feedback from your students. So with this goal, it's clear what the purpose is, what the purpose of the prompt is, and what the teacher wants to accomplish, right? Okay, now we are in the design stage. Let's say we are using my multiple choice template from earlier. Now, because you want to draw your students' attention to their note-taking habits, you will want to include a response related to their engagement in note-taking, right? So the other thing I want to emphasize is that your prompt doesn't always have to be multiple choice. In fact, you can even ask more than one question. You could do a series of questions kind of targeting the behavior or action you want your students to notice and become aware of. You can also use different question or prompt formats, such as a scale. For example, on a scale from 1 being very low, to 5 being very high, how would you describe your level of attention on the lecture? You could also use open-ended questions, such as describe what you were doing when the lecture paused, and have students write a more detailed answer. Again, one of the strengths of this activity is that you can be as creative as you want when you're designing it to make it responsive for your students. So for example, what is your level of focus on the webinar right now? Type in the chat number 1 if your level of focus is low, 2 if it's medium, and 3 if it is high. I'll give you a couple seconds to respond.
Yeah, let us know, everyone. Is your level of focus 1, 2, or 3? Low, medium, or high? What do you think? I see a couple people who seem like they're writing 5. That's awesome.
Wow.
And many people who say 3. Let's see. JM, Barack, Vanessa. Let's see. 2.7 from Juana. Sharmitsa says 2. Veli says 3. And Saeed says between 2 and 3, and lots of other people say 3. I'd say the majority of people are writing 3. So thanks for your responses, everybody.
I'm glad to see lots of medium and high. I love the creativity with the 2.7. That's amazing. And definitely, we'll engage students when we have that, give them that option, right, to be flexible. So we can also use this type of scale with your students. And if you have particularly tech savvy students, your students are really good with the internet, you can also get creative and use emojis. So instead of numbers like 1, 2, 3, you can have emojis like the clapping hands symbol for number 1, or the laughing face emoji on Facebook for number 1 if they're low. But again, make sure your students are very tech savvy and know how to do that. Otherwise, it could cause confusion. But yeah, and I'm sure you all have really creative ideas too. So I'd love to hear from you. Which adaptation or option would work best in your context?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So we looked at the scale idea. Kim also shared the multiple choice question about what you were doing. What adaptation would work best in your context? Kim shared a lot of different ones, open-ended questions as well. So maybe one of those or a different idea. Rosa says emojis would be great. We have a lot of people putting emojis in the chat, which is fun to see. Shaquille says a screenshot. Wow, I wonder if that means you take a screenshot of what you're looking at right then. That might be a little bit put you on the spot. Let's see. Emojis often work better with young students from Juana. Doing stand up or sitting up or standing down. That's a great idea. Or maybe using light colors and dark colors. Awesome. Wonderful ideas, you guys. This is great.
Yeah, I knew we'd get some creative ideas in the chat. But so thanks everyone for sharing. So now that we've finished designing our prompt, and again, we'll use our note-taking example, it's time to implement it. So when implementing this technique, I recommend being responsive to the student's comfort level with sharing this kind of information publicly. So I understand that many of your students might feel uncomfortable sharing their honest answer publicly. Now, I know in some contexts, your students might have a clicker, like the picture you see at the bottom, that allows students to answer questions anonymously. However, I know that not all contexts are high tech, so I want to offer some other options for implementing this technique. So if you are holding face-to-face classes, you could have students write their answer on a scrap piece of paper and turn it in anonymously. You could also have students kind of hold up a piece of paper or maybe like a thick index card in a way that only you can see. So kind of maybe like this, so other students can't see it. You could also have your students keep a journal where they write the answer to the prompts and you collect that journal and check it periodically. Now, if you're teaching virtually and are teaching on Zoom, there's an option for students to send you a private or a direct message with their prompt answers. Now, you can also have students email you their responses. And if you're doing, if you're focusing on note taking, that's a great way to collect their notes too from class, so you can kind of see how they're doing with that. Another option is to use a free survey form. I really like to use Google Forms, but I know Microsoft also has a forms option to collect responses. But I know there's so many tools out there, so I want to hear from you guys. What other options can you think of to collect prompt responses from students? And it could be publicly or anonymously. So I want to hear from you.
Yeah, let's hear from you, everybody. These are such great ideas, Kim. I know our audience must really appreciate all these wonderful tools and ideas you're sharing with us. What other options, audience, can you think of? So Munir said a word wall or Padlet. That's a great idea. What other options could you use to make sure that your students feel comfortable sharing their thoughts, either publicly or privately? Cesar says the forms are awesome. Rosa likes the private messages. Nearpod is a tool that we're hearing from Manana. Thanks for sharing that. WhatsApp chats from Tita. Private chat boxes from Aisha. A telegram from Eric. And Me says a Mentimeter. So those are awesome. And GFR says that they have a file with evidence that what they've learned that they upload to the school platform. That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks everybody for these great ideas. So now we come to the last step in the process. So this step occurs after you have implemented your punctuated lecture. It's time to reflect on the feedback you've received from your students. Now, there are many different ways to do this, but I like to start by asking these kind of questions to myself. One, did it provide me with information about student behaviors or understanding? For example, if you wanted to draw your students' attention to note-taking, did you observe more students taking notes after completing the prompt? Did the technique keep the students engaged? For example, did you notice increased engagement after you gave them the prompt? Did it promote student learning? This could be the content of the lecture, or it could be their self-monitoring or metacognitive skills. It doesn't have to be, or it could be all of them, right? And last, what will you do differently next time? If you think students did not gain an awareness or notice their behavior, maybe you could try a series of questions next time, or use a different format, or more emojis, as we found out. So this technique is so flexible, so be as creative as you want and responsive to your students. Well, we haven't seen our yellow car for a while, so I think we should check in on her. So we're at the halfway point right now, arriving at our next destination, which is home to an activity called Guided Notes. This is another activity from the K. Patricia Cross Academy website. And I wanted to share this activity with you because I thought it was so adaptable to almost any course or context, even for young learners. So Guided Notes are handouts. Now these can be soft copies or hard copies, but they're created by the teacher that outline the main points of their lecture, but have blank spaces for students to fill in as they are listening to the lecture. And again, it's better to show and not tell. So are you guys ready to practice some guided notes? All right, please take 1 minute to write this outline on the screen, on a piece of paper, or in your notebook. Please make sure to leave plenty of space to fill in the blank. These will be long sentences or phrases, so you want to have a lot of room to write. So Kate and I will give you about 1 minute, and then we will start the mini lecture. So Kate, I wanted to ask you, have you ever used guided notes either as a student or a teacher?
Yes, I have used them as a teacher and I've used them as a student, and I really like, especially using them as a student. It helps me feel excited about the next words that are coming, and I'm listening a little bit more actively. And as Kim said, I'm just going to repeat the instructions real quick. If you guys could all grab a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen and quickly write down these notes here and get ready for Kim's mini lecture where you can fill in the blanks here. So number 1, receive crucial blank about blank. Number 2, engage blank. Number 3, blank learning styles. Number 4, becomes a blank. Number 5, scaffold students blank. And number 6, help blank. So go ahead and write those down and let us know when you're all finished and ready to go. We'll give you about 15 more seconds here. And we see some nice ideas in the chat box. Elizabeth says this helps to follow our reading, and our Cyan says this helps in understanding. All right. I think we're probably ready to go.
Good. Well, I hope everyone is finished. So now we are going to listen to a mini lecture, and you will fill in the blanks in the outline that you just copied. All right, is everybody ready? So why should you use this guided notes activity during your lecture? Using this technique allows teachers to receive critical feedback about students' comprehension of key concepts. Guided notes can help engage students throughout the lecture. They will be paying attention because they don't want to miss any blanks in the notes. This activity supports various learning styles. For example, students that process information by writing will benefit greatly from this activity. After the lecture, these notes become a study guide for students, which can help them learn and reinforce the material. Guided notes scaffold students' note-taking and language skills, which particularly helps lower level students or young learners. And last, this activity can help increase attendance because you can't complete this activity and get a good grade unless you're in class, right? Okay, so how did everybody do? So please write in the chat your answer for number 1 and only number 1, because I know that's a lot of typing.
Yeah, so what did you write, everyone, for number 1? Receive crucial blank about blank. Did you catch that? Let's see if anyone caught that. Let's see. Feedback. I think that was definitely one of the words there for sure, Sharmisa. Thank you. Margarita also says feedback. Alero does too. Patricia says feedback and key concepts. Crucial critical feedback about comprehension. Something like this. Receive crucial feedback about students' comprehension from Zoe. So how did they do, Kim?
So let's review. So number 1 should read, receive critical feedback about students' comprehension of key concepts. So give us a thumbs up or type yes in the chat if you got that correct.
Yes, and we'll give you the point if you got it partly correct too. So you can give us a thumbs up or respond with yes as well. I see a lot of people did a great job on that activity. Great job. Well,
thanks everybody. Now here I go again, asking you 2 questions in a row, but I'm really curious and want to hear from you. Share with us in the chat, what skills do you think you were practicing during this guided notes activity?
Yeah, what do you think? What skills were you practicing during this guided notes activity? What do you think? Let's see, I see listening. Lots of people saying listening skills. And I see lots of thumbs up as well. Writing skills, great. Note-taking skills, Irina, active listening. Let's see, Tita, Kay, Julia, all have that idea. Listening and reading because the answers were on the slide. That's true. Layout and writing and listening from Landing. So great, thank you for those responses.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So now that we've discussed the reasons why we should try this technique and seen this activity in action, let's kind of break it down and explore how to develop strong guided notes for your students. So the first step would be to identify the content that the guided notes will cover. So a question you might want to ask yourself is, do you want to use this technique for a lecture, for a presentation, or a reading? I know many of you have challenging readings that you give to your students, so you might want to consider using guided notes to ensure the students extract the key points and concepts of that reading. Another question to consider and reflect on is, what content have your previous students struggled with? Having a good understanding of this question can assist you in kind of prioritizing content that you can later turn into guided notes. So you can kind of make a list of challenging topics and create guided notes that you can use hopefully for a long time in the future. So after determining the content the guided notes will cover, we must now identify our teaching goal, or what we are hoping to accomplish with this activity. So for example, do I want to develop my students' note-taking skills? Do I want to help students find and retain the key notes of the key points of the lecture? Do I want to keep students on task during the lecture? Again, clarifying the purpose and intention of the activity can focus and strengthen the design of your guided notes to ensure you get useful feedback from your students. So let's look at an example. So I will use the guided notes activity to help students find and retain the key points of the lecture. From this goal, it is clear what the purpose of the guided notes activity is and what the teacher wants to accomplish. Okay, so now we are ready to start designing the guided notes, now that we know what we want to accomplish. So because my teaching goal is to help students find and retain the key points of the lecture, I will highlight the important points in the guided notes. I will also include blank spaces so students actively listen and fill in the missing information of those points. Now, I want to point out here that while this close/fill in the blank format is perfectly acceptable and very efficient, there are also more options and possibilities out there when designing guided notes. And again, a reminder that this activity can be used more than once throughout a semester or academic year. In fact, I kind of recommend doing it more often because it's beneficial for students in that they develop learning strategies and more metacognitive skills. So as I said, fill in the blanks, very efficient way to format guided notes, but don't be afraid to experiment with different formats. So for example, instead of an outline, you can provide guiding questions that students must answer. Or instead of an outline or questions, you could also give your students a graphic organizer to fill out during the lecture, or actually include visuals within the guided notes. We want to have our students look at and engage with visuals because they use a different part of our brain to understand. Research tells us that the more we activate students' brains in different ways, the more they learn. Now, you can also have students create a visual to reinforce their learning. And having students create their own visuals and their own study guides is a great way to help students develop effective learning strategies for them. Now, I also wanted to point out that guided notes can be used with young learners because I know many people in our audience are teaching young learners. So for example, if you add some scaffolding in the guided notes, such as definitions for new vocabulary, you can help develop your young learners' language skills. I also recommend if you're using guided notes with young learners, it's beneficial to create opportunities for them to use their summarizing skills within the notes. Because as we know, summarizing skills will be crucial in their future academic life. So the sooner they start developing them, the better, right? And another way to scaffold language and skill development is to create a bullet journal type guided notes template where information is listed in kind of incomplete sentences and uses simplified grammar. So instead of focusing on the grammar, students can focus on summarizing the main points and using new vocabulary in context. Again, visuals are a great way to engage different areas of our learners' brains and reinforce their learning. So a great resource that everyone can check out after the webinar is a Teacher's Corner article called Visual Note Taking, which has more great ideas for using visuals and includes an explanation about bullet journaling if you want to learn more about it. But I want to hear more from all of you now. How would you adapt this activity for your context?
Yeah, let's hear from you. I'm glad that you brought up the young learner ideas, Kim, because we did have a nice question from Julia Pena about what you can do to accommodate for young children. So that was a great question, Julia, and we're happy to hear more of your ideas for how you might adapt this activity for your young students. And Cesar Osario also said that he just really likes this idea and how important notes are to reinforce concepts later. So great. What else do you think, everybody? How else might you adapt this activity for your context? Or maybe what are some of the ideas Kim has shared that you want to use? Jessica says, I love the bulletin journal idea. I would like to use this for note-taking in social studies. Let's see. I love the definitions for university students from Angela. I would make them do a visual when reading a novel from Newitt. So maybe drawing a picture or finding pictures. Drawing and coloring, great. Note-taking for listening. Journals from Luis. And Sophia says, I would definitely use notes with concepts and definitions included, plus the visual organizers, great ideas. And one more, Vanessa says, I'll use online questionnaires or surveys. So that's great, everybody. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I knew everyone would have really creative ideas. So thanks again for sharing. Okay, so let's pretend we have our guided notes finished and we're now ready to implement them in our class. So when implementing this technique, you want to make sure you clearly explain this activity or model the activity for students so they can clearly understand their expectations for participation. So for example, are you going to collect these guided notes and grade them? Or will you observe how students are completing their guided notes as you kind of walk through the room? All right, does this slide look familiar? You might be thinking it's deja vu. Again, the last step in the process happens after you have implemented your guided notes. So it's time to reflect on the notes or observations you have collected from your students. So again, did it provide me with information about student behaviors or understanding? So in our example, the goal was for students to find and retain key points from the lecture. So when reviewing the collected guided notes, were most students able to fill in the blanks with key information, or was some things missing, right? If things are missing, you might want to review that in the next lesson. Did the technique keep the students engaged? For example, did you notice increased engagement because they had to fill in those missing blanks? Did it promote student learning? Did they understand the lecture? Or do you think they developed, increased metacognitive skills or self-monitoring skills? And more importantly, what will you do differently next time? Maybe you can have the students create the guided notes. Give yourself less work to do, right? So again, this activity is extremely flexible for any context, so be as creative as you want. All right, it's time to check back in with our little yellow car. And it looks like we're heading to our last destination for today. It's an activity called press conference. So this is an activity I found in an article by Belinda Richardson and Debbie Griffin from Bellarmine University about interactive lecture activities. The link to the article is in the references. I wanted to share this activity with you, mostly because I just thought it looked really, really fun, and it requires very little prep time for the teachers. So before we start, I just want to see who knows what a press conference is. Tell us in the chat if you know.
Yeah, everybody, how would you define a press conference, or what is a press conference? How would you define it?
Kate, have you ever been to a press conference?
I don't think I've ever physically been to a press conference, but I've seen a lot of them on TV when there might be an important announcement about to take place. So let's see, Tita says this can be for news. And Donjetta says, I observe them all the time. Nabila says she loves the use of the little yellow car. Hi, Nabila. Aisha says with celebrities often, or maybe there's a meeting for briefing journalists from Alero. And GFR says giving news, and Sharmisa also says giving an important announcement. Excellent, thanks everyone.
Yeah, a lot of correct answers in the chat. So a press conference is a public interview given to journalists by an important person in order to make an announcement or answer questions. So it's very common for people like presidents or leaders of countries to give press conferences frequently to make announcements, just like we can see in the picture on the right. All right, now that we've got the vocabulary down, we're gonna jump in. So the press conference activity follows the session plan we reviewed in the beginning of the webinar. That is, it's a short 15 to 20 minute lecture segment followed by an activity that students can do individually or in groups. So after a brief lecture, students, either individually or in teams, think of questions related to the lecture topic that they don't know or don't understand, and ask the teacher these questions in a simulated press conference. This activity is very similar to another language learning activity called Hot Seat, where one person is asked many questions. But I think the biggest difference, though, between these two activities is the intention of the activity. So again, we're using it as a tool to gather feedback from our students, right? And their comprehension of the lecture topic. I also like to encourage students to practice their public speaking skills during this press conference activity. So I'd love to show you what this looks like. So I'm going to ask Kate for help. So Kate will be the student and I will be the teacher in this model. So Kate, here are some example lecture notes on the principles of interactive lecturing. Can you think of a question you would ask the teacher? Now, everybody, let's pretend that Kate has had more than a few minutes to think of her question.
All right, so I'm taking a look at these principles. Let's see. My question is, why are interactive lecture sessions divided into segments?
That is a great question, Kate. So the session is divided into segments of lecture and student activity. The presentation or lecture segment allows the teacher to give the students the information they need in a quick and organized way. The student activity segment allows students to apply their new knowledge and participate in their learning. Now, if this activity was continuing, another student would ask a different question until everyone in class had a chance to ask one. Thank you, Kate. You're a great actress.
Thanks.
So now that we've seen a demonstration and seen this activity in action, we want to hear from all of you. What do you think are the benefits of this kind of activity?
Yeah, what do you think, everyone? What are the benefits of a press conference activity? What do you think? Let's see. Oh, we have a nice comment from OL who says, you just gave me an idea for my final oral project I'm going to give to my students.
Great.
Let's see. Coral says, it's interactive. It guides students' learning and promotes interaction from Salvador. Everyone participates from Luis. Carlos says it promotes critical thinking. Let's see, what else do we have here? It promotes comprehension from Jose. There's a lot of feedback from Angela. Yekaterina says it develops speaking skills. And Fabiola says the students can express their own ideas. So those are all great responses. GFR also says speaking skills plus critical thinking while asking questions. So lots of things. Great.
Absolutely. So let's explore some more benefits of this activity. So why use this activity? Well, one, I think using a press conference allows teachers to receive feedback about what ideas and key concepts that students might need more time to understand. I also think this activity might be able to engage and refocus students that have been off task, right? Because if you put them in groups, they have to work together. And I also think this activity supports various learning styles, such as linguistic and interpersonal learners, because linguistic, we have to write our questions. Interpersonal, we're working with others. And I also think this activity is a great opportunity for students to practice and build both their language skills and their public speaking skills. So it's a win-win, right? So what's the next step? So the first step, again, is to identify our teaching goal or what we want to accomplish with this activity. For example, are we looking for what ideas or concepts need to be clarified? Are we looking for how well students are understanding key concepts? Are we looking for, for example, is more time needed on a specific topic or idea? Now, I know I must sound like a broken record, but again, clarifying the purpose and intention of the activity can inform, focus, and strengthen the design of your press conference activity to ensure you receive the type of feedback you want and need from your students. So let's look at an example. I will use the press conference activity to discover what ideas I have presented that are not clear to students. So from this goal, it's clear what the purpose of this press conference activity is and what the instructor wants to accomplish. All right, so now that we have our goal, we're ready to start designing the press conference. So my favorite thing about this activity is it does not require much prep time on the part of the teacher. So what you need to do is prepare your targeted lecture as normal. However, you might want to consider creating a handout explaining the activity for students and giving example questions. You can also model. And the last part is to be prepared to answer all of your students' questions because you definitely want to be able to answer and give them the clarification that they need. Okay, keep in mind that you can have students come up with questions for this activity individually, or you can have them work in groups. If there is a challenging reading that you believe requires more of your students' attention, you could have students create questions based on the reading instead of a lecture. Now, also remember, the teacher doesn't have to be the one that answers the questions. The students can be the person who is interviewed. You could even have a different person in the class, a different person each class period be in the hot seat. Now, this activity can also be adapted virtually. Students can prepare questions in advance and post them in the chat when you meet. Now, I also want to mention that this activity can be used with larger multi-level groups, and I wanted to give you some ideas for adaptations. So, for example, students can be put in groups to both create and answer questions. If you have a large class, this will make it easier for everyone to be able to ask a question. You can also rotate the students every few questions to ensure everyone participates. You could also have a timer and time students. So for example, they get 2 minutes to answer as many questions as they can, or 1 minute. And that can also be a way to ensure everyone participates. These are just a few ideas, and I'm sure you all have more that you can share. So tell us in the chat, how would you adapt this activity for your context?
Yeah, thanks for those great ideas, Kim. And we would like to hear from you once more about adapting this activity for your context. So what do you think? What are some ways that you might adapt this, or ideas that Kim shared that you would like to apply? What do you think? Let's see. A lot of people saying that they really love this idea. Thanks for this great idea. Let's see, Louise says we could do a debate. That's a great idea. We could have students rotate through different groups from Mina. And maybe have peers correct one another. So that's another great idea from Lena. Great, everybody. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So now that we've decided on a design, we can now move to implementing this activity. So when implementing this technique, you want to make sure you clearly explain the activity or model it to students so they understand their expectations for participation. You might want to consider requiring student participation or even make this a graded assignment. I also recommend you come to class prepared with a notebook or piece of paper to jot down notes on what questions your students are asking. This is going to be valuable later when you're reflecting on the feedback collected through your students' questions. And last but certainly not least, I bet this slide is starting to get old. But again, the last step is reflection. And this happens after you've implemented this activity and collected feedback through your students' questions. So again, ask yourself, did this activity provide me with information about student behaviors or their understanding? In our example, our goal was to find out what ideas were unclear to students. So when listening to their questions, what kind of questions were the students asking? Were they asking clarification questions on very basic elements of the idea or topic? Or were they asking really advanced questions, right? So the kind of questions students are asking can indicate their level of understanding about the material. If they're basic questions, you want to review that idea again in class, right? And again, did the technique keep students engaged? Did it promote learning? What will you do differently next time? So I want to hear from all of you. Do you think you'd be able to use this activity in your context? Why or why not?
Yeah, what do you think, everyone? Lots of people saying, thank you, very nice. Would you be able to use this activity in your context? For sure, from GFR, thanks. And I see a lot of other people responding, definitely. It sounds like a great idea. Super, great, everyone. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, good. So to quickly recap, I hope I've shown you today that interactive lecturing superpowers your lecture by engaging students and providing you, the teacher, with valuable feedback. We also covered 3 activities that can be adapted to be used in a face-to-face environment or virtually. So as you can see, we've come to the end of our journey together. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. We hope you enjoyed it and found some useful activities you can implement in your classroom. Thanks again for joining us. I hope everyone has a great day or night.
Thanks so much, Kim, for that great session. I think all of us got some really great ideas for motivating our learners who are enrolled in lecture style classes, so thank you. And as always, we'd like to thank you, our audience, for your lively engagement and participation today. We hope you'll continue to share your ideas through social media on our Ning or with your viewing groups after the session ends.